Hello again, Blender Heads, and welcome back to Chapter 5 of our character design tutorials. In the last chapter, we finished sculpting our Suzanne head, and in this chapter we're going to put away our sculpting tools and we're going to move on to some more traditional box modelling. So to start with, at the end of the last chapter, I promised that we would be coming back to doing Suzanne's eyelashes before moving on to the rest of her body. So let's make a start here. Now to begin with, so what we're going to do here is project the eyelashes onto this sculpt and kind of pull them out from there, pull out the rest of the shape from there. So I'm going to start by creating a plane. This is facing the wrong way, so I'm going to rotate that 90 degrees and then shrink that right down. And I need to shrink that quite a bit more still. Let's go to the front view for a moment, scale that down even further, and go and put this up. I'm going to put this right in the middle and then kind of extrude out in both directions. So these need to be pretty small and thin. I'm going to go with something about that. Let's just go from the side view and just move this much closer. Doesn't need to be on top of it. Because now we're going to come in here and we're going to add a few modifiers. Let's just give myself a little bit more space here. And the first thing we're going to add is the shrink wrap modifier. This is going to basically glue our piece of geometry onto the head here. So if we grab our target and glue that onto there, you can see that it snaps on the inside, well, just on the inside of the top of our eyelid there. So we can go and grab the offset and just shift that out ever so slightly. And there's multiple different modes that we can use here. Personally, I've found that project tends to work the best. You'll notice that it's popped out here. That's because we need to have both positive and negative selected, and it'll snap back in there. And then we can just pull that out a little bit further. It will depend on exactly what you're trying to shrink wrap as to exactly which mode you should use. Also found that above surface doesn't seem to want to work terribly well. I'm going to leave it on surface for now. The next thing we're going to do is add a mirror modifier so that we don't only have to do this once. I'm just going to minimize these so we can see a little bit better. I'm then going to add a solidify modifier. Now in this case it's pushing it into the head. I think I actually want to pull it out of the head slightly. Oh, that's way too much. No. Pull that right back to a very low number. I might just go back to our shrink wrap here and just bury this ever so slightly inside the head. And then we can make that just a little bit thicker. And then finally I'm going to add a subdivision surface so that all of this gets smoothed. Now we're ready to actually start shaping these eyelashes. So I'm going to go to the front view, going to edit mode, going to edge mode. I'm just going to use E to start extruding these. E to extrude, R to rotate, and just slowly but surely going to put a shape around her eyelid. Now I'm just going to drop back into X-ray mode for a second and just see how far down we want this to go. At least on these images, the eyelashes kind of, you can really only see them here. So I'm just going to go back over to here and pull up our image editor and just have a slightly closer look. And they're very subtle. I think we're going to go most of the way around the edge here. And then we can always remove some of it if we feel like it doesn't need to be quite this far down. Okay, I think we can call that good. And as I say, we'll come back and revisit that once we've retopologized the head. Okay, let's drop this over to our outliner again, because we've created a new object here, and we need to make sure that we name this, so eyelashes. And then we're going to go and hide all of these objects, because it's now time to work on the body. Okay, so let's just hop over into the front view here, and I'm going to go and grab our annotate tool, make sure that we've got our red color selected so you can see what I'm talking about. Let's just quickly go over the shapes of Suzanne's body again. As discussed in one of the first tutorials, she is predominantly made up of a whole bunch of different cylinders. Hang on, I've got that attached to the view. Let's attach it to the 3D cursor. Those ones are attached to the view now. Let me just erase those. Go back here. There we go, that's better. Okay, so she's predominantly made up of a whole bunch of different cylinders. And all of that stuff's going to be really, really easy to make. Maybe just a little bit of tapering here and there. In terms of body shapes and polygons, modeling from primitives, this is going to be fairly straightforward for the most part. There are going to be a couple of somewhat tricky areas. Most of those are going to be where shapes join, like pelvis, shoulders, around the wrist, and a little bit around the ankle. Some of that's just purely and simply because joining legs to pelvises, shoulders into arms, there's just some slightly trickier geometry in there, particularly in the shoulders when we want to take this arm and rotate it upwards and have it, pointing off in this direction. We need to make sure that we've got the correct topology built in through there so that both of her shoulder and her armpit there will have enough geometry to maintain their shape. And there's a little bit of similarity in the pelvis down here. The other thing that's going to potentially cause us a little bit of grief is the wrists and the ankles, where we've got these little tufts of fur that we're going to need to accommodate with our topology. So we may need to either have a few extra edge loops going up the arm here to accommodate the extra geometry we're going to need down here, or maybe we'll just end up having some branching topology that'll then allow us to get these shapes. But we'll deal with that when we get to it. Just to simplify things a little bit, let me just erase all of this so we can sort of start again. I'm going to build Suzanne kind of in chunks. So we're going to build the torso first, because that's kind of the central part of the character. We'll move on and then build arms and legs, because again, those are essentially just cylinders with a little bit of shaping to them. Relatively easy. Similar deal with the tail. I mean, it's essentially just a cylinder on a curve. We'll build fingers and toes independently. And then once we've got all of these bits modeled and ready, we'll then come back in and work on joining them at these potentially tricky points. Figure out how we're going to get these tufts of fur to work. So let's just go through and erase all of this. Go back to our selection tool over here, and let's make a start. So in a somewhat similar fashion to how we created the head, where we just sort of had a whole bunch of really low polygon primitives that we kind of mashed together, we're going to do the same thing here, in the sense that we're going to keep everything as low poly as we can, because it's much, much easier to add detail than it is to take it away. So rather than starting off with a torso here that's got 5,000 polygons or something ridiculous, we're going to start off with very, very low poly and then add edges as we need them once we get to joining these pieces. So the chest, for the most part, is basically just a cylinder shape. So I'm going to start with that. Actually, before we jump into that, let's delete that. We're still in the sculpting workflow, sculpting tab up here. Well, if I just drop back to layout here, you can see that we've still got our 3D cursor set to her face, which we did really early on. I'm going to go back over here to our 3D cursor under view and just reset that. You can also do that under the Shift S menu and go cursor to world origin. So now I'm going to go in and create a cylinder. And as you can see, this comes in with 32 vertices. That's going to be way more than what we need, and it's going to make it much more difficult to model her, because we'll just have so much more geometry that needs to be moved around. So I'm going to reduce this, and there's a little bit of trial and error in guessing just how many edges you're going to need, or vertices you're going to need. Based on previous experience, I'm going to go with 12 and make sure that that's quite low poly. As I said before, we can keep adding more as we need to. I also know that at some point we're going to be needing to reshape this and connect it to her head via her neck. Similar deal down the bottom here, where we're going to connect the legs. So we don't need these top and bottom faces. I'm going to delete those. And then we're just going to go in and start shaping things. Let's turn on X-ray mode. Last thing that I like to do is I'm going to delete half of my model. I'm going to come over here and add a mirror modifier. I like to get a mirror modifier in here as soon as possible, just because it kind of halves the amount of work you need to do. And that's definitely a good thing. Also make sure that you turn on clipping, because at the moment if we kind of pull this across, you can see that we can get some rather weird results. So make sure that clipping's on, and we'll never be able to go past that center point. So I'm going to scale this down. Just scale it in the X and Y. So it seems to be doing a rather mediocre job. Okay, I'm going to scale it in the X-axis for now. Oh no, okay, I can see what's going on here. I've still got my pivot point set to median here. Which is offsetting our scale a little bit, and it's not doing a particularly good job. So I'm going to go and set this to, what was active element? No. Okay, I'm going to want to go with 3D cursor in this case. I'm now going to scale that in until we get somewhere about here. I'll move this up so that we're working from the center. Just scale that down until this top edge ends up at the waist. Grab the bottom edge, scale that out till we get to that hip area. Actually, I have to be honest, this is kind of driving me crazy. Scaling from 3D cursor there. As you can see, it kind of offsets our scale a little bit. So I'm actually going to come in and apply our mirror modifier, and then we'll delete half of our model and reapply it once we get to the arms and legs. Okay, that's probably alright. Just one final look over without our wireframe on. Just check, particularly in joints where, legs join to hips or wrists join. Alright, I think I'm fairly happy with that. And in the next lesson, we'll jump in and we'll start to worry about retopologizing this head.